Browns at Jags. What y'all need to know to make some money on that bitch. So first thing, like my previous video with the Vikings, I'm a huge Jags fan. So if you take that, take this as like homerism or whatever you can. I don't think it is. Kind of depend on it not being actually, but yeah, Duval and all that. So first thing, weather. It's in Jacksonville, but it doesn't look like there's gonna be anything that's really relevant to the game state at this point. So Browns offense versus the Jaguars defense. First up, our injuries first. With the Browns, Wyatt Teller questionable. He's been questionable for a couple weeks. Played every time. I'm sure he's going to play here. On the Jags defense, so they got a lot of people that recently went on IR, including Josh Allen, defensive end, starting corner C.J. Henderson, Chris Claybrooks was playing as well, and Sidney Jones is out. So first step, we got the offensive line versus the defensive line, and in terms of run blocking. So and I'm going to tell you that the Browns are going to do some work here. Now, as far as the actual push at the line, it's not maybe going to be so dominant. I mean, the Browns can legitimately move people consistently, and Batonio, Treader, and Teller, their interior three are good. But with the Jags, I mean, Devon Hamilton is that dude's nice. He's a good nose tackle for sure, and he can legitimately make plays. But I mean, still he's a nose tackle. Let's not go crazy. And their other spot, I mean, Doug Costin's actually shown some nice things. He's an undrafted guy that they've been playing for a little bit here. Who, like I said, he's actually as a run defender. He's all right, but he's not preventative of anything. And then if Taven Bryan's in there, he's not the worst thing I've ever seen, but far from the best thing. And then on the edges, so again, the Browns tackle's fantastic in terms of run blocking, and the Jags D ends. So again, it's just kind of an interesting interaction here. The Jags defensive ends in terms of the likely starters of or snap achievers of Dwayne Smoot and Adam Gotsis are actually, especially Gotsis, are actually decent against the run. I mean, Gotsis has consistently made plays throughout this year, and Dwayne Smoot is, he's strong. That's as much as I would say about him. I'm not going to go so far as to say he means anything as an edge defender, really, but he's not a disaster. Caleb Chason, however, first round rookie on the other end, he will not hold up to these tackles and run defense. Absolutely not. Hence, I don't think he's going to be playing a whole lot in early downs in this game. But yeah, so I mean, the Browns O-line, they could push pretty much anybody. That includes the Jags here, but I actually don't expect them to be blowing them off the ball every snap. But there are going to be some that are there for sure. So then you get to that second level impact, and here is where the Jags get into real issues. So Miles Jag he's good for sure, but he is still decidedly prone to flying in the wrong direction. It's not that rare either, and over a course of rushing attempts, he can really be exploited. And Joe Schobert is, I mean, he just doesn't make plays really against the run almost ever, and he's just not a real limiting run defender. Just kind of clean up tackle guy. He gets his stats, not meaningful. And then their other spot, I mean, if it's Kamali Correa or Dakota Allen back from injury playing, just hopefully not Quincy Williams, because that's going to change some things for the Browns' favor. I don't think he's going to be playing though. Kamali Correa or Dakota Allen. Dakota Allen's actually shown some nice things for sure, but none of them are good enough here to consistently hold up. And the Browns' offensive line is going to affect them. I mean, Batonio gets up there. Both the tackles are really good in space. And while it's not going to be constant, I mean, Browns are really good at running the ball, and over the number of attempts they're likely to get in this game, it might get ugly. And maybe even more importantly, normally safeties don't come up as much in this section, but here they're important because the Jags safeties are comically awful, especially in run defense. Andrew Wingard is not an NFL player by any means. He can't function. He actively causes other teams to score points constantly. And Jared Wilson is just he's not enough of an athlete. I mean, you'll the amount of times you see him attempting to chase down a 75-yard touchdown. Let's just say it's always an attempt, not a success. So, so I just wanted to mention that there. So then, step 3, the pass rush. So here again, it's a borderline of 0 for the Jags. I mean, they have no real interior rushers. David Bryant is just not a useful rusher unless he's against really awful offensive linemen, which are not the case here. And while Joel Bitonio, the Browns guard, is not perfect in pass pro, he's more than good enough here. More than good enough. And Devon Hamilton, actually like him again, but that's against worse offensive lines that he comes into play. Not the case here. And on the edge, I mean, there's nothing. Dwayne Smoot is bad as a pass rusher, so he'll try hard, and after 5 seconds he can clean something up very occasionally, but that's it. And Adam Gotsis, like I said, he's a run defender, and Caleb Monchazon has shown nothing impressive really, especially against tackles of this caliber. So I mean, I would say really this is about as close to nothing as edge rushers you're going to get in the NFL game. So then you get to step 4, which is the receivers. Now, the Jags likely starting corners in this game are Trey Herndon, Josiah Scott, a pick just this last year in the draft, and Luke Barku, potentially. They called up Josh Nurse from the practice squad. And the point is, they're not good. Trey Herndon, he's a nice story last year, but he is notably exploitable, especially, interestingly, for a small corner, he's notably exploitable by agile receivers, Jarvis Landry. So, in terms of the receiver matchup, I mean, yeah, Jarvis Landry is, and Rashard Higgins too, are both more than good enough to consistently create space in this game. I mean, very consistently. And Donovan Peoples-Jones has shown some okay things, and even Kadarius Hodge, the Browns' fourth receiver, he's okay. And they're just going to be consistently open. And as far as the tight ends go, I mean, yeah, Miles Jack actually could limit. So tight ends being Austin Hooper, David Njoku, and Harrison Bryant, were all pretty good, especially David Njoku as a receiver. But I mean, Miles Jack could arguably limit one of them to a point, but it is not enough, really. Especially, it's not like it's a lot of play action stuff where he's not going to be in man coverage anyway. And the other guys they would put on, the safeties, are, again, terrible. Jared Wilson not quite as bad in this regard, but Andrew Wingard, yeah, it's not pretty. So yeah, there's just a lot of advantages for the Browns receivers. So the overall run game. So I would almost be at the level where I'd be willing to call it dominant, but I actually wouldn't quite here, like I said, because the Jags' defensive front in this game I don't necessarily think is going to consistently blown off the ball. There will be times, and they're not going to really hold up that well, but I don't actually think they're going to get killed completely. The issues come in. I think there are going to be a significant amount of large runs from the Browns because the linebackers can get out of position, safeties aren't fast enough to do anything, and the Browns' offense is really good at running the ball, and Nick Chubb is crazy. Cream on too. So there's just gonna be a significant amount of long runs in this game, which add up pretty quick. Yeah, it's tough. So then you get to Baker. So Baker's good when he's comfortable, and he's going to be comfortable in this game. There are 4 games, where he struggled to put up points right this year, 4.5. 2 versus the Ravens Steelers, which are very notably specific, zone blitzing, complicated schemes, which he does struggle with. Certainly not the case here. And then the other 2 games that were played, in a fucking wind tunnel, which are just not representative at all. Those are the Raiders and the Texans, I think. And then this last Eagles game too was in a torrential downpour, and they still ended up in the 20s. So yeah, like I said, when Baker's comfortable, he's good, and here he's going to be comfortable. The one thing I will say, he's Baker Mayfield. He is prone to throwing an interception. He just, when he sees a tight window to fit it through into downfield, he's going to try to take it, whether it works or not. But he's gonna be good. So then you get to the overall pass game again. It's just been consistently successful. There's just nothing about the Jags defense that any given drive or even almost any given play signals anything but success for the Browns. None of their coverage players are good enough to keep up. None of their pass rush is good enough to matter, except for, like I say, except for Miles Jack, who at the end of the day is still a linebacker. There's only so much you can do. So you're just looking at constant success there. And then in the red zone, too. I mean, Browns are good in the red zone, especially given how well they're going to be able to run the ball here. Because at that point, I mean, first, like I said, okay as the Jags front is in the red zone, they're still going to get pushed back some. And Jarvis Landry, Higgins, good enough to win quick, to win to the level you need in the red zone. They're just going to be good. And that's where Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt are really, really good about converting touchdowns. Very, very good. So overall points, I mean, I put it at like 33 to 40 here, and pretty comfortably. The only way is is if there's some real shenanigans with like in the Eagles game where 99 yards and then a fumble on the goal line or for whatever, didn't get a fourth down. That was the Eagles with the fumble, but there's just no reason for the Browns to not just win all the time, and it's not even dependent on Baker because they can run so well. So I would, like I said, 33-40, and that might even be a little bit low. It is still an NFL game, so that's where I put it for now. So then the Jags offense versus the Browns defense. So injuries on the Browns defense. No Denzel Ward, no Sheldrick Redwine, backup safety, and Andrew Sendejo is questionable. And for the Jags, DJ Chark and Chris Conley declared out, and still no Gardner Minshew. So we're looking at Mike Glenn as quarterback. And Dare Ogunbowale, just a third-string running back, declared questionable. So in terms of so actually, I'll just preface this with saying I don't think the Jags offense can be a disaster here. Remember, the Browns defense is bad, and I'm going to go through why. But even with Mike Glennon, there's pathways to success. So first, you talk about the offensive line versus the defensive line. And Andrew Norwell, starting guard for the Jags, got put on IR just recently too. So in his place, it'll either be rookie Ben Barch, Tyler Shatley, or maybe Will Richardson. Likely Ben Barch. That's what I would expect. But none of whom are actually all that awful. Ben Barch has been beat some pretty badly at times this year, but he's shown some decent things, especially as a movement-oriented run blocker. And Tyler Shatley, again, he's not. He is at least an NFL player, as are they all. But so in terms of interior, Brandon Linder, good, really good as a center, and AJ Cann has a ton of his of flaws and issues, but actually, as a run blocker, over the course of the game, he can be okay. Now he can be a disaster too, but that more has to do with his pass protection, and he can cause some disastrous run plays as well. But as just a pusher in the run game, he's actually not terrible. And the Browns' defensive tackles can be pushed. I mean, Sheldon Richardson and Larry Ogunjobi, well, Sheldon Richardson especially is, he's trying to penetrate so much. He can get pushed around a little bit. Now he's not a disaster. And Larry Ogunjobi is just, he's a little undersized. He's not crazy. And I don't think he's going to get pushed. I know he's not going to get pushed around in this game, but I don't think he's going to be an advantage either for the Browns necessarily in the run game. But there are going to be losses. There is going to be penetration from Richardson, from Jordan Elliott, their rookie out of Mizzou, and from Larry Ogunjobi too. And then on the edges, so the Jags tackles are actually good run blockers. And no Myles Garrett for the Browns. Also, he's on the COVID list still. So you're looking at Adrian Claiborne and Olivier Vernon as their main edges. And both of those guys are actually reasonable against the run. Maybe even a little better. I would say reasonable against the run. But the Jags tackles can probably get the best of them at times. It's not going to be consistent. It's not going to be dominant. But Juwan Taylor and Cam Robinson, they can do some okay things in the run game. And I think that includes here. Especially their just rotations a little bit suspect with their another backup, Porter Gustin, and Joe Jackson, another backup defensive end, all also on injured reserve or the COVID list. So I think there's going to be a little bit of push up front. So then you get to second level impact, and the Browns linebackers are all varying levels of bad to awful, to mediocre to awful. Malcolm Smith is okay, but as a run defender, that's just it. And B.J. Goodson is a okay, box between the tackles guy, but he really lacks range, and he's just he's not a dominant force between the tackles. And their third one, whether they start Jacob Phillips, the rookie at LSU, or Mac Wilson, they're exploitable. To be honest with you, they can be run around, and I think the Jags can actually counter them. Um, move to the second level up of a block at the line of scrimmage to a not awful degree. I mean, the tackles, like I said, are good. They can do some nice things, and Ben Barch has flashed some movement. AJ Cannon's not awful downfield, and Brandon Linder's good. So they can affect them. And when you take bad linebackers and then allow them to be affected by offensive linemen, it can get kind of bad. So then, yeah, I think there's gonna be some push. So or some effect there. So then you talk about the pass rush, and again here without Myles Garrett, I mean on the interior there's real issues at the guard spots for the Jags versus Sheldon Richardson and a little bit Larry Ogunjobi, but again non-Aaron Donald interior rusher, it just limits the ceiling of his impact, but he is notable here. And then on the edges, I mean, so the Jags tackles are not completely awful. Juwan Taylor's actually pretty good. Cam Robinson can look awful, and over a bunch of pass attempts, he can be awful. Or have awful consequences, but actually he's not constantly bad. And Olivier Vernon and Agent Claiborne are, I would say, good enough to take advantage of his shortcomings. And Juwan Taylor's not perfect either over time, over a lot of pass attempts, and I think that'll show up in this game. But like as a consistent issue, I don't necessarily think. All right, I'm positive that they're not going to be in the backfield all the time. So before you talk about the receivers, so no DJ Chark, no Chris Conley. I hope I mentioned that in the injuries. And that sounds awful, but it's actually not maybe quite as bad as it sounds. They get Laviska Shenault back from injury, and they still have Keelan Cole. Listen, Keelan Cole's good. That's just it. He is. He's not great, but he is good. He does separate, and he makes plays. And Laviska Shenault too. I mean, he's reasonable to good, and he makes plays fairly notably too. And their other receiver though, not so much Colin Johnson, just a tall, unathletic guy. He can be shut down to a point. And then they called up like Trick-Quinn from the practice squad. They have Terry Godwin, two guys who are French NFL players. Trick-Quinn's actually maybe a little bit better than that, but nothing real useful. But maybe more important is the Browns corner situation with no Denzel Ward. So you talk about Terrence Mitchell and Kevin Johnson as the outside guys who I actually like both of them to a point. I think they're reasonable, but Keelan Cole is better than both of them. Is going to find space, and maybe more importantly is the slot where Laviska Shenault plays out of, and for the Browns, it's going to be Tavier Thomas, which is an issue. I mean, if you remember versus the Bengals earlier in the season, Tyler Boyd went crazy, and it's because of Tavier Thomas. I mean, Tyler Boyd is not he's fine. He's a little bit better than fine, but he is a scheme oriented, just I don't want to say mediocre, but just okay separated from the slot who doesn't really create a lot for himself, and he was able to, consistently beat Tavier Thomas and Laviska Shenault. Maybe at this point still a little bit, certainly still worse as a route runner than Tyler Boyd, but he's not that far behind it. He's good, and he can beat Tavier Thomas is the point. So there are paths for open receivers between him and Keelan Cole, and Colin Johnson's not a disaster. There are paths for the Jags to have places to throw, and also the Browns. Safety's terrible. I mean, Andrew Sendejo is awful as a coverage safety, and Ronnie Harrison is pretty bad himself. He's a little bit better, especially the closer to the line of scrimmage you get, but he's nothing special. And if they play Carl Joseph, I mean, he's just also Andrew Sendejo, really. So, yeah, I mean, when you talk about the overall run game, I actually think while this game is close, it's gonna be pretty successful. I mean. The Browns are just a bad run defense. That's just it. And their Jags offensive line is reasonable. And James Robinson is good. He adds yards to an offense, the Jags running back. And they're going to be able to run the ball to a point now. It's not going to be crazy. And James Robinson's speed does limit the real chunk plays. but it's there. So then you talk about 6, which is the quarterback versus the defense, and now we're Mike Glennon getting the start. So not quite as in tune with Mike Glennon as the quarterbacks who've been starting, in the last 4 years. But he is, if anything, he's a statue 1, and 2, he's just not that good. So, and with the statue thing, I mean, that could get dangerous for sure. Like I said, the pass rush is not going to be killer here, but it can be dangerous. And I mean, Adrian Claiborne's sack fumble is it's possible, is what I'm gonna say. But yeah, I mean, he's not going to be in an untenable situation with like pressure all around or with no options. So I actually think they're going to be able to move the ball. I mean, Keelan Cole and like Lester Chanel can drive offense to a point. Like I said, it's not going to be crazy, but they're not going to be a disaster. I'd be very surprised if they're a disaster unless Mike Glennon is so unbelievably awful. But I mean, if you switch him out for insert terrible quarterback here, Mitch Trubisky. Mitch Trubisky could guide this could guide this offense to some yardage in this scenario. I would feel comfortable saying that. And Mike Glennon can't be that much worse. So then you get into the overall pass game, which, like I said, I mean, when you have receivers driving short too, they don't need accurate contested balls. They can get open. It's going to be okay. Now it's not going to be great. Again, Mike Glennon is not good enough to do anything better than okay, but it's not going to be a disaster. So then the red zone, that's where he shows up as being bad. I'm sure, and then Laviska Shenault and Keelan Cole just aren't as quite good enough to drive touchdowns in that range. James Robinson's really good, but then their offensive line is not dominant, so I think they do have red zone issues, touchdown issues here, but not terrible. There are still pathways to scoring touchdowns, so I'd say overall for them, I mean, I would put them honestly. I put them in the high teens. I mean, 14 to 21 is where I would go with them pretty comfortably. So then you talk about the lines here. So we got Cleveland -7 and an over of 48.5. So I'll start Cleveland -7. I'm all good with that. They're significantly better. Like I said, they're going to score a ton of points in this game. There's Jags offense is god awful, and they're playing against Mike Glennon. Cleveland -7, all good. But also, I think the over is also a really, really, really strong choice here because the Browns might cover that themselves, to be honest with you. It is possible. And if they don't, the Jags can move the ball well enough that, I mean, if they just score, a touchdown and a couple field goals, all of a sudden, I don't even think it's necessarily possible for it to go under. So I'd feel really, really good about both the Browns -7 and the over 48.5.